My name is Babs. This morning, I'm wearing a green shirt with a skeleton dude on a raft because I didn't know that I was going to be up in front of you describing what I was wearing. I'm a short-haired human with my glasses on today and spiky unkempt hair, and I am happy to be here. Before we begin the service, we do have several announcements. Immediately following today's service, we will have a very short special congregational meeting. And this is to approve a candidate to fill the vacancies on the facilities or for the facilities trustee on the board of trustees. And we will also approve a candidate to fill a vacancy on the nominating committee. Members, please sign in at the table over by the kitchen so we can make sure we have a quorum for our meeting. Now, following that very brief meeting, we will have our monthly friendly feast, which is our potluck style meal, and you are invited to stay for food and conversation, and that's whether you brought anything or not. You'll always have some snackums. A visitation and celebration of life for Bill Boltus will be held at the Gorman, I'm probably going to say this wrong, Sharp Funeral Home, sorry about that. On Saturday, July 13th, visitation will begin at 9 a.m. and Bill's celebration of life will begin at 11 a.m. Interment at Maple Park Cemetery will immediately follow. The family has requested to have a memorial luncheon at the First UU, and we need volunteers to help set up the space and host the building for the family. And please see Reverend Michelle to be a volunteer for that. And we have 5 Sundays left before our AV Tech returns to Springfield, and several of our previous AV volunteers are no longer here or available. When we don't have AV staff or a volunteer, Reverend Michelle does this. So that's impressive, but thank you, Reverend Michelle. She wants you to know that this is problematic for a couple of reasons. She has a number of other responsibilities on Sunday morning, as you can imagine, that require a lot of attention. She's not very good at it. Her words, not mine. And 3, she won't be here for at least 2 of those 5 Sundays. So if some of you have some technical prowess and are willing and able to help, we would very much appreciate that. So let's volunteer, let Michelle know if you are available for that. Another announcement here, during the spring, the First UU congregants took the first step towards identifying our values. We had outstanding participation in our deep listening circles, which identified over 40 values that we share. Over the next 9 to 12 months, we will work together in a congregational-wide process to consider those values, beliefs, and visions, culminating in the creation of a new mission statement. It's exciting. The intention of the new mission statement will reflect the unique characteristics of who we are and why we exist and what we seek to accomplish as an organization. Today, we are asking you to complete a short survey of the top 5 values that resonate with you. The paper survey will be available after the service, and a digital version will be in this week's What's Up, which will come through your email. Please see the survey and return it by July 21st. I have a couple more announcements here from the podium. Information cards about the August 6th primary election are available on the side table over by the kitchen. Thank you, Sherry, for sharing that. And Becky shares that the intergenerational game night is this Saturday, the 13th at 4 p.m. Bring your own board games or enjoy one of the many that we have here. And you can see Becky in the back if you have any questions. It's lots of fun. Hope you can make it. So let us now center ourselves in this sacred time and space as we before we enjoy The Lost Chord by Sir Arthur Sullivan. I actually have one more announcement, and that actually has to do with this. Folks received a program when they came in. This is awesome because you can follow along, know where we're going to be in the service. We haven't printed these off for a while. So the great thing is that you can know where we're going and keep up with it. And the not so great thing is that sometimes things change. So just so you know, and it had already been printed, just so you know, the moment of perspective will follow the message instead of precede it. But thank you to those who made this available for us today. And now we can center ourselves and enjoy Colleen performing The Lost Chord by Sir Arthur Sullivan.
Good morning. My name is Stacy, and I am the service leader this morning. Welcome to First UU. I am a plus-sized woman in my mid-70s. My hair is short, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm also wearing a dogwood blossomed flowered shirt and flower earrings. Let us pause to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Neokunska people, known sometimes by the name Osage. They are the descendants of the people who were forcibly removed from this land by colonists and make up the Osage Nation. We acknowledge their continued struggle for justice. Our chalice lighting words this morning are Beacon of Freedom by Tracy Johnson. Following the lighting of the chalice, we will sing Chalice, Chalice, and the words will be on the screen. The chalice lighter in the sanctuary is Ryan C. Beacon of Freedom. We kindle our chalice flame this morning, awakening the fire of our ancestors in our hearts. Beacon of freedom held out to light the way, light of reason illuminating the path, spark of courage igniting our spirits, aglow with hope for all we endeavor to do together. Holy flame of times past, brighten this present moment, that we may be the love that is both our center and our foundation. Blessed be. Thank you, Ryan. Recently, I'm hearing an echo. What is... Recently, the weekly UU email series called Braver, Wiser included a lovely piece by Martha Durkee Newman titled Hard, Brave Choices. Hard, brave choices. This is the year in which hard, brave choices will be required of all of us. Our world is changing. So much is in flux. Increasingly, we are faced with questions and decisions about our money, our time, our place in history, how we act, what matters, what we give our attention to, what kind of world we're building. She ends the piece with this short prayer. Spirit of discernment, be with us as we make the hard, brave choices that lie in front of us right now. Help us to know that when we lean on each other, our shared courage infinitely grows, and we can move alongside one another into the world to come. May it be so. Several months ago, I heard the odd but memorable term jet pig and understood that it was somehow related to the UUA. Eventually, I made time to visit the UUA website to see what I could learn about JETPIG, which was indeed there. I discovered that JETPIG was an acronym for the then proposed and now adopted Article 2 revision of the UUA bylaws. As Reverend Michelle shared last Sunday, JETPIG stands for Justice, Equity, Transformation, Pluralism, Interdependence, Generosity, and love at the center. Over the last 7 months, the whole worship services adopted a monthly pattern of fully learning a song or hymn. This month, we are going to focus on the JETPIG song. The bonus is that we will not only have learned a new song, but we will also be familiar with the outlines of the Article 2 revision. This JETPIG song was created by the UU congregation in Malden, Massachusetts. The lyrics and movements are the work of Sarah Krakauer, who is their director of religious education. The music was composed by Soren Ostenfeld, the director of music. The singers are Sarah Krakauer, Soren Ostenfeld, and their minister, Reverend Otto Concannon. This morning, we'll watch a video so we can see and hear how the song goes. And then we'll run the video a second time and sing along. And we're waiting for the great skills of our minister.
Grow at every age. What makes you a true you? Love at the core of what you do. We commit to work as a team. a true you. Love at the core of what you do. We commit to work as a team to make our values more than a dream. Jetbig helps us keep in mind 6 values that UUs have defined. Jetbig helps us keep in mind 6 values that UUs have defined. What makes you a true you? Love at the core of what you do. We commit to work as a team to make our values more than a dream. Jetbig helps us keep in mind 6 values that UUs have defined. Justice means we make things fair. We vote, speak up, and act with care. Equity is when everyone gets what they need for work and fun. Transformation means we change, and we can still grow at every age. What makes you a true you? Love at the core of what you do. We commit to work as a team to make our values more than a dream. Jetbig helps us keep in mind 6 values that UUs have defined. Pluralism is how we say we know there's not just one right way. Interdependence means they're connected, so our earth and its people are respected. Generosity is the last we can learn to share before we're asked. What makes you a true you? Love at the core of what you do. We commit to work as a team to make our values more than a dream. Jetbig helps us keep in mind 6 values that UUs have defined. Jetbig helps us keep in mind 6 values that UUs have defined.
Hello. Good morning. I am Reverend Michelle Scott Huffman. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the minister here at First UU and happy to be here with you today. I'm a middle-aged generally pale-skinned woman with short, spiky, salt and pepper hair, and wearing black pants and a red plaid shirt today, and that's not working well.
Good morning. I'm Sherry Buchanan. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm sitting here for several reasons. One, I was your delegate, one of your delegates at General Assembly this year, and I wanted to share some of my observations. And I'm also committed to trying to help us figure out how we want to go forward with some of the things that were approved there. I wanted to learn more about the Article 2 revisions and some of the actions for immediate witness that were approved, some of the other resolutions. But I also wanted to go because I've developed a pretty deep distrust of some of the changes I've seen in the Unitarian Universalist Association over the last few years, some of the politics, some of the agendas that I think efforts to move forward with some of those have caused some pain in this congregation. And I just think it's time for us to have some open discussions about that. Reverend Michelle and I've had a few private interchanges about some of my questions and concerns. And we decided that it's probably good to bring them forward. We could be here all afternoon, so we're going to stick pretty close to a script to keep us within a time limit. But I know many of you agree that I learn something from you every time we talk. I don't always wrap my head around all of it, but it challenges me to go forward. So that's what we're doing this morning, and hopefully this will spark some interest in having some broader conversations, including many of you who may be kind of curious about what's happening with all of this. So with that said, we narrowed it down to 3 questions from a much longer list, and I didn't even write all those down for you. So my first question for Reverend Michelle was that I was happy to see at General Assembly that there were discussions before each of the votes with equal time allotted to the pros and the cons. And they used con as the label for people with concerns. And there were many reminders that it was okay to disagree or to question, and that we needed to be respectful of and hold space for differences. I listened to those, but I also followed the chats, and it became obvious right away in the chat rooms that the people who were on the con side were having to be very, very careful about how they asked questions or how they worded things. And it was also pretty obvious that pretty quick to judgment on the part of others who didn't favor those dissenting opinions or concerns, or were pretty quick to attribute harmful intentions to some of the things that were being said. So, and in addition to my experiences at GA, I've been reading a lot of others who have been contesting some of what they would consider distorted or exaggerated UUA proceedings, politics, cultural agenda. And I've also observed some of that right here in our congregation about how voices of dissent are many times not all that comfortably welcomed. So I just wanted to know some of your thoughts on that.
All right, here we go. I think that we should always be very careful about how we express ourselves. And I think it's a muscle that we exercise. In some ways, it goes against our sense of freedom. And as you use, that's a pretty important value to us. To think that our words should be measured and spoken with great care. It can feel exhausting to have to do what feels like significant mental work before we say or type something. And my experience is that if we practice continually, we build that muscle. And we feel more peace and satisfaction inside ourselves. I once preached a sermon where I asked the question, what if grace were my first response? What if when someone said something that upset me or activated something within me, I kept my mouth shut until I got to grace? Ray, can you turn me down just a little bit? That sermon has haunted me for over a decade. It's also made me a better person and a better minister. There's a common line in many progressive covenants that says, assume best intent and take responsibility for impact, that recognizes that often our intent does not equal the impact of our words on someone else. This is a call to people on every side of a conversation, and I'm a firm believer that there is no conversation that only has two sides. On every side of a conversation, we are invited to assume best intent and take responsibility for our impact. If we assume that the person whose words just caused harm was not acting or speaking with malintent, but clearly has a different viewpoint of the subject matter, then we can lean in with curiosity. We can ask helpful questions about what makes them see the issue so differently than we see it. Likewise, if conversation partners are assuming best intent and leaning in with curiosity instead of snapping to judgment, people who have said something harmful can reconsider their words and seek to restore the relationship so that important conversation might continue. You offered a beautiful demonstration of this earlier this week. A while ago, you shared some concerns with me and quoted a UU author with whom I deeply disagree on nearly everything.
We'll talk about that.
My response was to say that this person was a part of a fringe group who stands outside General Assemblies trying to peel people off and use fear and anger to bring people over to their side. My intent was to say that I think there's a much bigger picture than what is represented in that person's writings, and that it would be important to consider all of it. The impact was that I dismissed your concerns by discounting your source and shut down any further productive conversation. In our conversation this week, you gracefully called me in by reminding me of that conversation and placing it in the larger context of civil discourse about hard topics. So I want to apologize for my choice of words that had a harmful impact and recommit myself to being more careful about how I express myself.
Thank you. I very much appreciate how you've handled that, and it feels good. And I totally agree that we have to consider the impact of our words and our actions. But I agree also that it's definitely a two-way street. I could have assumed that you had malintent, trying to head me off, put me down, head me in a different direction. I could have just considered myself harmed and gone away and refused to talk to you about it anymore, or maybe about it, even anything. But I also knew that I had some responsibility on how to interpret the impact of that interaction. And one of the most important things I heard at GA was something that I hope we'll continue to remind ourselves of, and that is, when you feel harmed, is it because someone is objecting to your perspective on something, or because they're objecting to who you are? And I knew good and well that you weren't objecting to who I was. So the dialogue could continue. My next question is this. Despite articles in the UU World during the past few years that addressed white supremacy culture, many of us may not have known that the UUA board has made a seemingly uncontestable declaration that UUism is rife with white supremacy and that it is our theological mandate to root it out from our midst. Evidence of the potency of this agenda was ongoing at GA. After service last Sunday, someone said to me, "I didn't know I was a white supremacist." There may have been others scratching their heads over the allegation that was made during the service. Claims of white supremacy in our congregation have been circulating for several years. There's been little common understanding of what those claims mean and few chances to have honest discussion. We have lost members who didn't want to be chastised about white supremacy and others who thought we weren't willing to own up to it. I don't think it's too late to have constructive discussions about this. What do you think would be helpful?
So first, let me go on record to say that I think if we have grown up white in America and have functioned in predominantly white institutions, we are steeped in the practices, privilege, and biases of white supremacy. Because of this, I recognize that I often act in ways that are characteristic of white supremacy. And by definition, that sometimes makes me a white supremacist. I'm not proud of this, but neither must I feel guilt or shame about it. We used to say that in any kind of recovery, the first step is to admit you have a problem. People who have done significant anti-racism work freely use the language of white supremacy because we've been asked by our friends and neighbors of color to stop pretending the problems went away in the 1960s. They didn't. That being said, I believe we can have important conversations about hard topics and find language that works for most everyone in the conversation. We'll never be able to find language that works for everyone. Right. The bottom line is if we're using language that makes people feel defensive or uncomfortable, we aren't cultivating the possibilities for meaningful dialogue that results in real transformation. I think an important first step is to make conversations accessible to people where they are. This is a two-way street. People have to be willing to do some of the work themselves. This is one of the things that sets us apart from some other religious traditions, that we are committed to continual learning that results in meaningful action. It's also important to recognize that some folks in marginalized communities won't be able to participate in those starter conversations because it can be toxic and harmful to them, which I think leads us into your next question, but I want to make sure you have space to respond.
Because I will. And what I wrote in response to Reverend Michelle was that I don't think we're that far apart on the basic principles and premises behind the work that we all need to be doing to change what I agree is a systemically racist and a very white privileged society. One of the reasons that I'm a UU is because of the decades of work that I think UUs have done around that work. And I certainly agree that the 60s didn't finish it. Perhaps there's a generational gap with terminology, because the original meaning of white supremacy was a belief that other races are inferior and that whites have a right of domination. The term evokes for me, and I think a lot of people of my generation, very malevolent, violent, terrifying memories for some of us who lived through legal segregation and proud KKK demonstrations and lynchings and Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination and just other horrific acts of white supremacy. And I guess part of me, when you start flattening it, broadening it to include other concepts, it sort of dilutes it in counterproductive ways, and I don't want it diluted. I want it to always have that horrible connotation. I think that one of the things that when it's used, it shuts down dialogue, and I think it keeps those of us who need to continually be examining our white privilege and and how these things play out in our congregation. I think it keeps us from doing that. We just say, I'm not a white supremacist, and go away. So I think we need to have some very honest discussion as a congregation about what do we mean? What's our common language? When someone says that's white supremacy, I know what comes to my mind. And I think we need to have those discussions. So I think we need to stay very uncomfortable about this because I've seen it be divisive in our congregation. I think it's confusing to a lot of us, and I think we need to find some spaces where we can have those conversations. And yes, my last question is related to that, and it's this. UUA guides us to center marginalized voices and to decenter practices that continue inequities and that ignore cultures other than the white dominant, cisgender dominant one. What are some ways to center and empower those who are marginalized without silencing and driving away UUs who hold the privileges of the dominant culture? Is there room for everyone who chooses UUism? And I ask, are we truly intent on widening the circle or redefining it so that some of us don't fit anymore?
So to answer somewhat bluntly, I think we are intent on widening our circle and also making it clear that some language or some ideas don't fit anymore. We are a living tradition. And if we are truly widening the circle, we're bringing in people who haven't been a part of shaping this thing because they've been historically excluded. This is where covenant comes in. For one, our covenant can help us separate a person's humanity from the idea they are expressing or language they're using, and it creates a pathway for calling in. For saying, because I am in covenanted relationship with you, I need to address what I've just heard you say so that I can better understand what you meant, and you can better understand why it was harmful to me. Real relationships require accountability. We know this from our marriages, our families, our careers, but somehow, sometimes we don't think it's necessary in these relationships. Like these just magically do their own thing. And once we widen our circle to include people of different social and economic backgrounds, neurodiverse people, people with differing physical and mental abilities, people who are trans and non-binary, people with different religious and non-religious worldviews, people of many ethnicities and nationalities, we learn things about the way our language must change. And if love is our highest value and the central foundation of our lived values, why would we not change our words and behaviors to be more inclusive? Most of us would never use the N-word in reference to a person of color, or the R-word in reference to someone with developmental disabilities. But there are other words that stereotype and dehumanize others that we do use. I think there are 3 tools that can help us center and empower marginalized voices while still including and valuing the contributions of privileged majority groups. The first is to create a culture of welcome, a space where we are all truly excited to learn about and from one another, where we celebrate that the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the value of interdependence invites us to really get to know one another and support each other. The second is affinity groups, where we gather together around common interests or beliefs, bringing together diverse people who share something very important in common, but also have differences in other ways. The humanist group, the skill-sharing circle, these are all examples of those kinds of affinity groups. They gather regularly to discuss or practice their common interests rather than putting all their eggs in the Sunday service basket and expecting to get all their needs met there. I hope that before long we'll also have UU pagans, UU Christians, UU Buddhists, and other affinity groups building relationships and shared practice together. It's really important that we do that because that's what strengthens us to be able to go into other spaces where there are different challenges that we're facing. So the third tool I think that we can use is caucus groups. We will always have a need to learn more about marginalized groups and the intersections of our privileges and biases. It's been a best practice for years in anti-racism, anti-oppression work to offer caucus spaces. Like in anti-racism work, a person of color caucus and a white caucus, or sometimes a Black, Latinx, and white caucus, because the experiences of those groups are very different. And when we do that work in mixed groups, oftentimes it can quickly devolve into tokenism and requiring the emotional labor of marginalized groups to educate the privileged groups. You've heard people say, well, if those people would just show up, we could have a better conversation. Well, those people are done showing up for you to have your conversations. Like, use Google, read a book, watch a video. There are lots of ways that we can learn what we need to learn from people in marginalized groups without having to drag them through that, what is sometimes traumatic. The use of caucus groups provides safe space for everyone to do their work in such a way that everyone is educated and energized for further conversation and shared action in mixed spaces. Again, it's another one of those spaces that strengthens us to go out into the spaces that are a little less. And to be the church that we, our community, and our world need. As you already said, we could go on all day long. But for now, how about if we share our gratitude for a good and honest conversation and agree to stay in the conversation and in relationship together.
And not just you and me, but the greater community. I just truly believe we're sort of at a critical point in this congregation, and it's time for us to get honest and have these discussions and figure out how we can live it all together and still be true to our UU principles. So, can I have a hug?
Yes.